is working for Shipzero, and that's a startup from Hamburg, actually. And they focus on really getting you that actionable data in the realm of shipping and logistics. And then once you have the data, of course, it becomes very interesting to work with AI. Why so? We hear it from Caroline Nüsse, who is Business Development Manager at Shipzero. Welcome on stage. And your clicker is over there.
Perfect, thank you. Last one of the day. I think all of you had a lot of insights already, so I hope I can wrap this up with some practical insights from the field of sustainability and logistics. So why is this topic even a discussion? Why is this important? So I know, especially after the past news with the US election and then also with our own national insecurities now in planning, everything is a lot. But the main challenge of today for us and for many, many others out there is actually the carbon impact. And we see that generally lots of regulations are coming into place addressing this topic. And one particular sector is the logistics sector. There are some insights, and they're saying that we need to reduce at least 3 billion tons by 2050 in order to stay in our 2-degree target. What does that actually mean from a policy side and regulation side of things? We see this scenario here, where the dotted line shows us the high ambition targets where we could go in case the regulation and also the efficiency gains ramp up. What the other graph shows, however, is the actual line where we're currently going to, meaning we will desperately need to reduce our carbon impact in the transport and logistics sector. The reason for this is, even though we have a lot of efficiency gains within the transportation sector, whether that is new fuels, whether that is just generally more efficient vehicles, the global impact rises because the demand is increasing heavily. So with all the different sectors coming together, efficiency gains definitely need to increase. What does it say about us? Where do we come in? Shipzero is a company based in Hamburg, and we claim that we measure where others are guessing. We are currently having multiple clients in our client base who are ranging from shippers, LSPs, and carriers, and we are doing what they can't, or we help them there. We are a data platform. We are tracking their emissions. We are reporting for them. And then, of course, we are trying to reduce and help them with their reduction strategies. Currently, we have around 100 million shipments tracked. And most importantly, we see that with our help, we are able, on average, to reduce their carbon emissions by about 8% each year. How is that possible, you might ask, with just basically data? I will guide you through this main question in the following slides, and I hope to give you some insights about what calculation actually means, emission calculation, and how we are able to reduce just by increasing transparency and more precise calculation efforts. Just to begin with, why in general are we doing this? Why are companies interested in reducing besides just being climate active or ambassadors? In transportation, we see that more and more regulation comes into place. For maritime, for example, there's the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and they set the goal to reduce in 2050 to 70% of carbon emission intensity. This is all in the EU, under the legislation of the Fit for 55 package, which is addressing all different sectors with different reduction goals. In general, however, it is focusing on absolute reduction until 2050 of 100%. That is quite ambitious, and there are also some challenges coming with that. So, but how could that be addressed, especially in logistics sector? So there are multiple reduction clusters that come into mind here. The first, of course, is that we have different opportunities when it comes to fuel and operational alternatives. For example, in road transportation, we see that there has been a huge debate on HVO, for example, or also on electrifying certain last mile deliveries. At the same time, we see that there's quite the efficiency increases in hub operations, meaning harbor operations, warehouses, and so on. And at the same time, there's also quite the potential in maintenance by, for example, just decreasing downtimes of vehicles, improving the lifespan of vehicles, and so on. And in the end, of course, we see clean energy is also ramping up, meaning that lots of companies are addressing this by setting up solar panels on their warehouses or logistic hubs. All of this, however, are just basically the last point of reduction. They are addressing reduction actively, but there needs to be a baseline in order to have an informed decision before you actually invest in all of these things. You need to know what could that investment lead to. Otherwise, you will just say, I know with solar I could reduce, but you don't actually know by how much. So it is basically just some targeted strategy, but it's not very based on data. So we are coming back to why is data important for informed decisions? We say data generally is key. And by data, we don't mean just information. We mean that you take actionable actions based on the data and you create knowledge with it in order to then make informed reduction strategies. Before I jump into all the calculation details, I would like to give some insights on what actually emission calculation is, because I assume lots of you know a lot of things about that already, but sometimes it's just a good concept to just dive into that quickly. So when we're talking about emission calculation and reporting in general, there are three scopes. There's scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1, we are talking about the owned emissions generated by everything that is in the company's own operations, meaning their own buildings, their own hubs, or in this case also their own vehicle fleet. In scope 2, we are then more looking into what kind of services have they bought which generated emissions. That is then, for example, heating, electricity, or steam. In the third, we are talking about everything from up and downstream, which has been then generated by the company or their suppliers. So we know the main challenge where you don't or have little to no contact or touch point with your data is the scope 3. And this is something which is of particular interest for transport companies or generally all companies who have something to do within the transport chain or supply chain, because the scope 3 emissions, for the main part, are one of the biggest sections for all companies worldwide to address. But we see that there is a huge imbalance of information. Most of the companies know their scope 1, which is good. And then with scope 2, sometimes they know that also as well. But with scope 3, they need more data from their partners, their suppliers, and all the different actors within their own transport chain to be available for their calculation. And here we come into something which I would like you to take away as basically the main takeaway of my presentation today, because I think all of you encounter carbon results or generally emissions on a day-to-day basis, whether that is on certain fruits in the supermarket or clothing, sometimes it's also included. And I just want to explain the concept of carbon calculation a bit more in detail, because this is also where our service comes in handy. When we're speaking about carbon calculation, there are 3 levels or clusters we are talking about. This is not only transport specific, this can be taken for all the calculations out there. At the bottom, we have calculation based on default data. Default data in transportation means we have little to no data. we could have the start and end point, and we could know the mode, which, for example, is then a maritime transportation from Singapore to Rotterdam, for example. This is good, but this is not giving us anything more in order to have a very precise calculation and also to be able to compare different transportation with each other. Then the second level, which can be split up in different sub-levels, is there. That is the modeled category. The model category is where multiple data or information systems then come together. We see with modeled, adding on to the start and end point and the mode. For example, we then get more information about the fuel type, not only A to B, but maybe point A1, A2, A2, so and so on. So we have more information about the locations, the exact information about how long a ship, for example, stayed in the harbor, and so on. So we have way more information to improve the calculation we already have. And then the biggest, or I would always say the king class of carbon calculation, is calculating based on primary data. Primary data means we have the actual consumption. For a truck, that would mean we have fueling information. For example, we have a road trip from Munich to Berlin, and we have, with different timestamps, we have information about how much fuel has been consumed in the meantime. So we are now not only calculating based on generic information about locations or modes, but we have more specific information about the actual consumption. With that, it means that only with primary data we can make very informed decisions and are able to have better, or I would say better, reduction strategies in place, because we are calculating on the actual consumption. One example to illustrate the key benefit of primary data, I brought in an example of one of our internal studies. We compared model data to primary data calculation. We see that we had multiple transports where we had the results of, even though sometimes we see improved information not only about the fueling, but also about the actual kilometers driven, we ended up with lower emissions just by calculating more precise. And the reason behind that is, first, the emission factors that are out there for the default and the modeled calculations are generally more conservative. Why? Because they heavily rely on scientific papers which normally are published 2 or 4 years prior to your calculation. So they rely on all the data and all the efficiencies from certain vehicles where they then calculated on. So that is one thing, but they are conservative by nature, because legislation or the methodologies that are published try to improve, or not improve, but they try to enhance the efficiency by bringing more and more companies into primary data calculation, because only based on that, then you are able to effectively reduce emissions in the long run. So we see here that even though we sometimes ended up with 5 to 10% longer roads because we had more precise kilometer information, still we end up with lower emissions. And this is how improved information, or in this case data, allows us to reduce emissions. And this is the key benefit on why data is so essential and our models are so essential for companies to start to calculate on better data, more data, and bring that together to form knowledge. So I spoke a lot about that already. So the central role of data quality for efficiency, since we're talking about machine learning and AI, I brought a few examples on how those systems could help within the logistics sector. So we have, of course, the road optimization, where we see that with improved information and more data sources, we are able to, for example, get more traffic information, get more weather information, and by that we are able to share recommendations on which road would be the better way to take. At the same time, we also have the freight brokerage. For example, their efficiency could be increased that multiple shippers share the same system. And through that, then they are able to allocate different capacity. For example, if one shipper has some 20% capacity left, the other shipper could book his fair share on that there as well. And then we have, of course, predictive maintenance, where we could decrease downtime and also increase lifespan of vehicles by having more informed information prior any accidents or any downtime. So the planning and the efficiency is a huge part here. What do we do when we're talking about emission analytics? Our service for our clients and the consultancy work we are doing is that we use imputation for our provided data, because sometimes we don't get the perfect data from our clients. Sometimes it's just an Excel. And most of the time, especially in logistics, we're talking about quite a conservative sector. So with that, that means that sometimes, and we see that in our data sets, after 4 p.m., the data entry sometimes is not any good anymore. And that is just the human error in it. We see that 4 p.m., maybe I just put another null in there, or I miss any information. And then our model, of course, says, what is happening? We need that information. With imputation, for example, we then include our shipment weights in there or any missing information. So with that data, we allow our clients to make more informed decisions and also to reduce their impact, just to have more planned information and then bring that information together in actionable insights. So due to the time, I just quickly skip here and just give some brief information about how we do that. So we are bringing in all the different data sources from our clients, which is then transport management systems or ERP systems, everything which they have at hand. We bring that together. We see where some data gaps could be. So we do a lot of the data enrichment and also the analysis prior to our calculation. And this is the main service, and this is the main part where that service is desperately needed also for other sectors, not only logistics, but everywhere, basically. There needs to be a check. Because without the check, without the data quality check, the results you get out of it couldn't be any good. So there needs to be some sort of data quality in between before you are able to calculate, because otherwise you end up with, I would always say shit in, shit out, but that is a key part of what we're doing. So the main takeaway of today, primary data is a key for any emission calculation, whether that is logistics or any other sector. However, with high quality data, we are then able to make effective decisions. But efficiency gains heavily rely on data quality. And with that, of course, we have to make sure that the data we bring in and also then from a product perspective, hand over to the decision makers has to be of value and has to have a message. If it's just basically transferring data to another table and no one can make anything out of it and can't transfer any actionable knowledge, then it's of no value. And that, I would say, is also the key thing we have to address in order to be able to address the main challenge of carbon within any sector, changing the way how the data for sustainability and efficiency gains is perceived. there is a lot of potential in there, and it's just basically about how it could be framed and how it could be used in other sections as well, beyond reporting and emissions itself.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. Very quick questions. Raise your hand if you have a quick question. Anybody in the audience? Yes, anybody, please. How do you actually track that data? So how do you get into the trucks and really know how much fuel they consume? Do you have to is the standard truck already equipped, or do you have to retrofit it, or?
The normal trucks is actually, or most of the trucks are equipped with GPS tracking, which is not, it is of value, but it's not of the value we are looking for. We are looking for telematics systems which are actually tracking the fuel consumption. And I would say most of the bigger companies have that installed, so it's easier for us to get our hands on that. Aside from the fact that data sharing is a challenge.
And then also you have various truck brands in one fleet and all the different systems, and you have to combine the Volvo with the MAN with the Daimler truck, and then it becomes...
From the telematics side of things, I think we have now over 30, 40 different systems only for telematics systems. In general, we have connections to more than 150 systems and constantly growing.
Thanks a lot, Caroline.
Thank you.
Yes.